Hey everybody, my name is Nita Baum and I'm the founder of Be Free, and I'm kicking off this series from here in the East Village in New York City about equity leadership. In this series of videos, I'm going to share a perspective on what equity leadership means to us at Be Free. I'll share a case story from our experiences with clients in this work. And then I'll share our reflections and insights from our perspective on that story. And that will be an invitation to you to share in the comments any perspectives, thoughts, learning, questions, or other facets of dialogue that occur to you. I was really motivated to do this series and to share my voice in this work more broadly because I feel that we sorely need more equity leadership in our workplaces and in our country. So what is equity leadership? Equity leadership is an ongoing practice of self-leadership, self-responsibility, and self-trust in service of the well-being, sustainability, and freedom of all people. So now I'll share a case story about an experience I had in early June. It is a bright early June morning in the summer of 2020, and it's a few days after the murder of George Floyd. And so in some ways, this day is very different than the days that have preceded it for this bright, purpose-driven CEO who's excited to get up and kick off his day working on the remote community and company that he runs. He gets up, he prepares his coffee in the kitchen. He looks at his desk and he starts to pace and make his way toward it as he feels the fear and anxiety in his body rise. He's been deciding what to write and what to say to his community in the wake of the transnational mobilization for racial equity that is occurring a few days after George Floyd's death. And he's nervous. He's never made a statement like this before. And the fear that arises in his heart and his mind is, if I say something, what if the thing I say is the wrong thing? And that fear is very gripping, and he can feel it physically. He's drinking his coffee and he's walking back and forth as he's scribbling notes to prepare this statement that he's going to make. And he's writing, and he feels a little frenetic and he feels a little frantic and somewhat distracted. And he'll occasionally check his texts. He'll notice his breath, how it's a little constricted in his body. And then he'll walk back to his desk and he will sit down and type up his notes and take a look and take one last deep breath before he hits send so it can post on the community page. A few minutes after he does this, the replies start coming in, and he is oh so curious. The first one says, "Kudos, great job. Thank you so much for acknowledging what is happening right now and for making a statement." More praise and kudos come in. "Great letter, man. That was awesome. Thank you." And as he's seeing these letters, he's feeling pretty good about himself. He's been going through a big awakening about his whiteness and what that has meant for him in his life. And then the dreaded reply comes in. It is from a woman who identifies herself as Black, who's a remote working community member, and her name is Shane. And Shane says to the CEO, "Where is the self-reflexivity? Where is the you in the statement that you made? I don't feel you taking ownership personally. And that feels to me like it's a big missing piece." He reads that and his fear comes to the fore. Damn, that's exactly what I thought was going to happen. I said the wrong thing. And that fear turns to anger. I actually wrote a really great letter. And it turns to righteousness. And it's, who is this person to be telling me in my community, the company that I am the CEO of, what kind of statement to be making? And so he feels that rise in his body, he feels the adrenaline rush, and he gets up and he drinks more coffee and he paces back and forth. And he wants to reply, and he wants to make it an angry reply. And instead of doing that, he sees himself in a given moment and he pauses and he stops and he takes some time. And he decides to write back a couple of hours later. And when he does, instead of sharing the reply that came when he was angry, he shares this instead. I totally agree with you, Shane. I see you and I acknowledge you. And I appreciate you for sharing that. Shane writes back just as he's getting up to go get a cup of water. And she says, "Thank you for that acknowledgement." She's surprised. And she later writes him to ask about connecting. What are the insights and reflections that I take away from this story and experience I had with a CEO who I spoke to about his own experience? Number one is it really makes me think about what is the purpose of the race equity conversations we are having in the United States today. And what comes to mind for me immediately is, can we take care of our own well-being and each other's as we're having these conversations? If he had made a different choice, if she had made a different choice, that conversation would have escalated and very likely compromised each of their own well-being. My second reflection or insight is, so often when you think about who is the equity leader in this story, it's pretty easy to conclude that it is the white male CEO, because our default is often to center the person in power, the person with privilege, and the person who in title is the leader. But equity leadership is something that's available to all of us. It's really ultimately about connecting to our own agency, our self-leadership, our capacity to be self-responsible. And Shane absolutely demonstrated her own capacity to be self-responsible. She voiced herself openly in a community where the kind of response she could have gotten from a CEO was he could have shut her down or silenced her, which is potentially an experience she's had as a Black woman in her life many times. And she chose this move in service of whatever she needed in that moment. And she exercised her agency, as did the CEO. The CEO exercised his agency and his connection to his inner power, the power to love and care and choose something different than the habituated patterns he may have relied on in the past. My third insight from this story is when I spoke to the CEO and asked him what he gave up, he said fear. And when I asked him what he gained, he said a friend and connection. And that was profound to hear, because he could have said, I gave up power. What we often give up when we choose to connect, when we choose to spread love and care, is a connection to our own egos, is to being disempowered by the ways in which our egos and our fears have power over us. And that harms not only us, but it harms each other. Thank you so much for listening and for being part of this journey. I am not very big on social media, so this is a fun experiment to me. And the purpose is really in service of your well-being and all of ours. Welcome your comments and your feedback and your engagement. Be well.